everyone so differently. And in addition to that, it's also impacting people similarly as well. But I think it's important to recognize the differences, whether it's, a healthcare provider that is providing care for their elderly mother, we're looking at that patient population differently, or if it's a single mother that is still working in a healthcare role but now she doesn't have childcare, and just really recognizing the balances of that. We're seeing maybe it's a medical resident that has left their family from another province and is now working in an isolated environment away from their family, and what is that like for them? And maybe they're at risk of experiencing depression or anxiety during this time. So we're really looking at each and every person. And I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of that as healthcare workers. That's one of our strengths, is that we're empathetic, that we could recognize the different perspectives and views that each and every, whether it's a patient, whether it's a colleague, but really recognizing those differences and being able to still provide support and understanding for each and every individual.
Yeah, that's so key right now, just to really lean in and listen to people and find out what they're feeling. It's so true. Greg has a question of, what range of futures are health professionals currently preparing for? What do you believe could unfold over the next 2 to 6 months?
I think the range of futures, it's a little bit unpredictable right now, but I think we're trying to really prepare ourselves for any situation right now. We are trying our best to manage our resources. We are trying our best to get prepared, whether it's, being able to find more ventilators, more PPE, more potential resources where we might need to expand hospitals. I think that we are trying to be as proactive as possible right now. Being in Canada, we've been able to even see globally what has happened, right? And I think having that lens and that sight has given us the opportunity to do some more preparation for what could come. And I think that even when we do have updates constantly, I think that's really important and key here too. During times where things are constantly changing, I think as healthcare workers and leaders, it's really important for us to communicate these changes as quickly as possible. So, during a time of uncertainty, it does help to give at least some power and control back when you are able to hear whatever information is available to you as soon as possible versus it being delayed.
Yeah. And when I think about what we're in right now and in the area of mental health and resilience, I just can't help but feel like this is such a not great timing in the middle of a mental health crisis that we were already in. And people on medication for anxiety or depression or any kind of mental illness. I don't even know really what to ask when it comes to that, but what are you noticing from a pharmacist point of view when it comes to the mental health crisis that we've already brought in now to a pandemic? What would you say to that?
If you think about it, there are a few different perspectives you could look at it at. I think the world is basically shut down in some sense, right? And there is that ability to now self-reflect and to take a little pause. But then there's also that one lens that there is uncertainty and that might increase anxiety as well. So I think that during a time such as this, as healthcare professionals, we need to fully maximize our ability to still provide care. So, we are managing COVID, but I think it's very important that we continue to manage chronic illnesses such as mental health issues as well. And, there are still ways to do that, whether it's through, telemedicine. And it's important that we still allow our patients to know that healthcare professionals are still reachable. You still can, seek help, whether it's counseling, whether it's initiating a new antidepressant due to some symptoms and presentations of depression. I think it's really important to recognize that although we are in this pandemic, we still have the ability to treat our patients for mental health during this time as well.
Yeah. That's reassuring.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed as well, is some of the people who are most at risk in the healthcare profession, in my view, and correct me if I'm wrong, but, in some ways they're some of the most vulnerable. So when you think about, pharmacies and pharmacy technician, pharmacists, obviously pharmacist assistants, right? A lot of the front line. You think about a lot of these LPNs who are working in care facilities, and they're not really well paid, compared to, of course, registered nurses, which, is not a statement of anyone's worth or value, but you think these are the folks who are really in these tough situations. They've got to be the gatekeeper a lot of the time, right? Before you see the pharmacist, you have to see the pharmacy assistant. Before, you see the doctor in a care facility, you got to see the LPN. And you hear these stories of so many of these folks getting sick, and they just keep showing up at the front line because they care, and then obviously you've got pharmacists and pharmacy technicians working in hospitals and in the primary care network and all of that. And so what is sort of some advice for them? Because I can just imagine the amount of stress they're under every day. Just going to work must be a battle. And how would you navigate that? If somebody was asking for your advice, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that is something that's very real, and it is happening right now. I think the best thing for them to do is to perform whatever abilities they can of, hand washing and protecting themselves, advocating for resources when they are needed to their leadership. During this time though, we are experiencing supply shortages for PPE. So it's definitely very difficult, but at the same time, we do need to protect our staff as well so that they are able to stay well, and also to prevent them from further spreading the virus to others as well. So I think it's really important that as healthcare workers, we realize that it's very important that we take care of health, because we're not doing good for others if we are not able to protect ourselves. I think that's something that's really important here, is just to recognize that if you aren't feeling well, you shouldn't be coming to work, because you're not able to actually help your patients by coming to work and being ill. So I think it's doing whatever you can right now is to protect yourself.
That's really good. That's really good.
James,
so yeah, go ahead, Connie.
James had a comment in the thread about ADHD. A lot of business owners have ADHD. I think people with ADHD make the best entrepreneurs. I personally have it, and there's a lot of interesting thoughts around it. I like to. James has ADHD as well. I oftentimes there's so many ideas about what it is, and I would really like your thoughts on this, Angel. But just for everyone listening, an example of ADHD that I can think of right off the top of my head was when I was in the passport office, and I was given a number. I was given number 62, and I looked at it 4 times. I memorized it, and I put it in my head, and then I put it down. And then 5 minutes later, they're calling out, number 61, 61, 61. And I'm thinking, who's the fool that's not answering? And it was me. Somewhere between getting my paper, I had convinced myself that I was number 62, not 61. And that's just such a typical ADHD trait. Something triggers in the brain. But shiny object syndrome, Greg says. That's funny. Squirrel. What could you tell us a little bit about managing? Because ADHD traits, we're often very dysregulated, and we're very squirrel. What advice would you give to the ADHD folks? Because clearly there's a bunch. A lot of people are commenting. What would you say for us managing our mental health in a pandemic?
I think that's very interesting to say that, but I must say that I think this pandemic is really changing everyone. It's making everybody very cautious and self-aware of things that never really truly had as much attention to. Like, even if you think about the aspects of hand washing, now it's become so much more, scrutinized and important. And I think that, as much as this has been quite a crisis, I think that you're seeing already a movement in having more attention towards, proper hand hygiene, which is really great. Just seeing the protective and preventative measures that we're starting to see, whether we're going to the grocery store or, even in, apartment complex, we're seeing a lot more attention being paid to areas where, potentially there can be some germ spread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, Yeah, so
Sorry.
you can see the good that comes through something like this as well, I guess, right? But yeah,
Sure.
sorry, Connie, go ahead.
No, that's great. That's great. Lydia wanted to ask you that her friend's boss isn't heeding to the health guidelines for this pandemic. What advice do you have for those who are under unethical authority behind closed doors?
I think it's really important to, to use your voice, whether it's to speak to HR, whether it's to speak to somebody who is in a position that can, take some of that information. And I think this is quite a serious pandemic, and it is important that everybody is complying with the health measures that are being mandated right now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I think it's a tough one, right? It's one of those ones where, here in Alberta, and I wonder in Ontario, it's probably similar, where the government has actually set up hotlines so that you can, kind of share that if you feel you need to with the appropriate, in our province, it would be Alberta Health Services, and then they can do the proper investigation. But it's a tough one, right? Because, I think that for some folks, they may feel like I'm not at risk, or they may feel like I'm asymptomatic, and so I'm fine. But you can actually be a carrier, and that's where you're putting other people at risk, which is, I think, the real tragedy. Even if you're okay, someone else may not be,
Yeah.
because they come into contact with you, right? So big shift in thinking for people, right? I saw this meme. I love these memes, and somebody had said that in 2019, the advice was stay away from negative people. In 2020, it's stay away from positive people. So I apologize. I had to, repeat it, but, COVID-19 positive people, so it's, there's always somebody online who will come up with something that just kind of puts it in a fun way. And I think we have to laugh. And so we have to have laughter in terms of a sense of humor. So tell us a couple of things you're doing for your own self-care, Angel, because looking at you, you look fresh, you look happy, you look healthy, you look like you've got energy. I've been on so many Zoom calls in the last week, and people are like, Starbucks is an essential service, kind of a thing. But you seem to have some energy. So tell us about that, if you don't mind sharing just your own personal routines and how you've kept your head above board.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that it's important to recognize that each and every one of us, we all struggle with this right now. And so, even though, you could be positive and optimistic and energetic, each and every one of us at some point during this pandemic has experienced days where we don't feel like we have the same amount of energy we normally do. And I think that that's okay for us to feel that way and to be accepting of that. The few things that I've been doing is definitely connecting more with, my family and friends through the use of technology. I think that's really key for people to be doing that. In addition to that, you just find something that is your passion, whether it's something that you enjoy, whether it's taking up an old hobby like drawing, playing an instrument, doing things that maybe you wouldn't normally do, like, cleaning your tiles in your bathroom.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
Finding yourself a little bit of a task list and goals to keep yourself motivated. And other things that I've been doing, as well as, doing a lot of reading. I think that it's nice just to have a little escape, whether it's, watching some movies, watching your favorite sitcoms. It's so important that not only are we recognizing the magnitude of this pandemic, but we're also giving ourselves an opportunity to just do a little escape, whether it's, watching your favorite show or, enjoying a meal. I think it's so important that we still try to give ourselves an opportunity to just, enjoy ourselves, because it's really hard when you're staying in a confined space, and you're constantly having the same thoughts. I think you need to be able to keep yourself occupied and be able to enjoy a part of your day as well in order to be productive.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that.
And so if you are working remotely as well, you're making sure that you are doing things, whether it's following a routine, dressing up like you would normally dress up if you were going to the office or going into work. So there's so many different things you can do, such as taking stretches and taking little breaks from your devices. I think that's also really key as well.
I would agree. Absolutely. So then, kind of moving forward, what pieces of advice or thoughts do you have for us, just thinking about that. And actually, Jane, who you know, she has a question about, you know, seniors who are technologically challenged and any advice that we might give to them. What are your thoughts about that?
Sure. I mean, I think that during this time, it is definitely tough for that population group, but there's still phones, which is really important. And I think it's important that we still connect with them, or we find creative ways to connect with them, whether it's writing a letter, snail mail. I think that's always nice as well. But, you know, I think it's important that we don't forget about this population, because they are high at risk and we don't want them to feel isolated as well. So, for example, I think that for the elderly, it might be a disconnect for them, and they may not understand the magnitude of what's happening. But it is very important that we're still mindful and creative of ways that we could connect with our elderly family members or patients. And I think that this gives definitely, you know, an opportunity for those healthcare providers that do work in, you know, long-term care facilities to maybe realize that gap in that social environment that's missing for them, and maybe being able to provide that extra compassion and empathy to those patients.
Love it. Thank you.
No problem.
Wow, these are so good. I really like what you said about taking time to still enjoy creativity, just downtime, reading a good book, watching a good movie. I know Abe and myself, there has been no rest for the weary. This pandemic hit and we hit the ground running hard. And I remember, I think it was last weekend, we were running so hard, just wanting to be a help. And, you know, everyone's playing their part. You know, we have the pharmacists playing their part, healthcare, you know, you have us as coaches and leaders wanting to rise up right now instead of back down and just let things kind of turn out the way, whatever way they will turn out. And I just literally needed to shut down one day, and I put on Anna Green Gables for the entire day. And it was the best thing ever. You know, I've heard people say we're not called to watch Netflix and chill right now. Well, sometimes we are, you know, just to unwind from the front line, especially leaders. You know, in order for us to lead well, we have to rest well. I really love what you said there.
Yeah, so good. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we got a couple of comments and questions here in the chat box. You know, the idea, you know, Jane was talking about reverting to the old kind of ways. Our facility reverted back to reusable isolation gowns and masks for low-risk residents. And I guess this is an issue kind of about the supply chain. I think, you know, and maybe because of your expertise, and I know some people on the call might not love this question, but I do, and I'll ask it because, and I'm sure others will love the question, because it is a bit more of a technical question. Like, to be honest, like I kind of, you know, I'm a well-educated person, I think, depending on how you measure it, and definitely have a business education. And I just had no awareness that we've got these supply chain issues when it comes to medical equipment. And kind of as a Canadian thinking and having all this confidence in our healthcare system, it kind of feels like somebody has pulled the wool over on our eyes, because, you know, like you can't even go into Costco and buy sanitizing wipes. And I think, well, okay, as a consumer, I can get by, but if I'm working in a hospital, I can't get by, you know, and if I feel like I need the masks and I need the gowns and I absolutely need the personal protective equipment, like kind of like what the heck is going on, and how did our supply chain get to this point? I mean, we're a G7 country, we're supposed to be pretty well developed, and yet it seems like there's breakdowns if I'm listening to the daily media. So maybe you could kind of speak to that, because I'm sure you're much more educated in this than I would be, and I'd love to hear what's really happening and what's broken down, if anything, and how we can sort of solve it going forward.
Mm-hmm. And that's very interesting, because I think that there are some active measures being taken in place right now. But I think with this pandemic, you know, it is it isn't the normal amount of protective equipment that's being used in our daily, healthcare careers, because this is a pandemic. So there's definitely going to be a surge in terms of use. And that surge is going to continue to increase as the spread of COVID also increases. However, what's, been kind of like a silver lining and a nice form of teamwork is that there's so many different manufacturers that are switching their line of production, whether or not they've never, even gone into the trade of building personal protective equipment, and now they're trying to help and assist with this. So we have, for example, I believe that we have Labatt that's trying to work in terms of making hand sanitizers. So we're seeing all these different organizations, whether it's an automobile supplier, they're trying to just change what they typically produce to find ways to actually help to produce some of these protective equipments that are needed right now. So we're seeing a lot of teamwork right now through manufacturers. So I think that's been really positive, and just also to see the government to really push forward that we do need to increase our production for these protective supplies, but also for ventilators. So, we are really trying our best to work hard in terms of what we have to offer. So it's important to also realize that we need more supplies, but there are many different organizations that are trying to play an active role in helping to assist with some of these supply issues.
Yeah, and do you think that the issue around some of this stuff will cause some level of change in terms of what we think our range of supplies needed are for surges and future pandemics? In other words, if my reserve supply is much higher than it was right now, then I'm probably going to be in good shape for the next time around. And it just doesn't feel like a lot of folks are saying that the reserve supply has been where it needs to be. So do you see some of those patterns changing, or do you think it'll just be business as usual after this pandemic kind of goes
I think
away?
it will definitely change. I think that even when we look at every day what's happening globally, I think we have to be agile right now, and we have to continue to adjust based on what's happening with this pandemic. And so I think that there will be definitely a change, and that things will be addressed every single day, that there are changes. And I think that those changes will continue to progress for the future as well.
So can I ask you a controversial question?
Sure.
It's not too controversial, but it's interesting because I read a lot of the news, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. And so if you're not comfortable answering because of medical reasons, I get that. But sort of mask versus no mask, right? And it seems to be something where people are saying, some are saying yes, you should wear a mask, and others are saying you shouldn't. And personally, it's interesting to me to see people, because I've traveled to Asia many, many times. And of course, in Asia, you've got huge cities on a scale we don't see here in Canada, except for Toronto. But even Toronto, the density is nothing like Manila or Bangkok, right? And so, of course, you see people wearing masks all the time, and these cities, and part of it is just the sheer pollution, right? And yet, of course, a lot of folks would also say that they swear by them in terms of sort of virus prevention. And over here in North America, it's not usual for us to see that. And yet I'm seeing a lot more of it in my neighborhood, and it doesn't bother me. It's more of like this interesting sort of curiosity. And so I'd love to hear what are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. I think, well, that's a good question, especially given the supply chain issues right now for personal protective equipment. I think what's important is that the usage of masks should be, they should be prioritized for patients that are infected and for healthcare workers.
Yeah, I would agree, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like if I'm healthy and I have to choose between, hey, I've got a box of masks here, should I wear it, versus maybe donating it to the local health clinic or a hospital. I mean, I think, it would be not very good use for me. And, what Jane is saying here in Vancouver is, that they've had to create Vancouver Coastal, a centralized emergency supply warehouse that distributes 3 to 4 days of supply at a time. That's really, so that even shows there that there's concerns about supply chain and ensuring that people are just getting enough, And so, no, thanks for that. It's great. Great for sharing that. So Greg is saying that it's amazing to me that the highest paid members of society, professional athletes, entertainers, have done virtually nothing, while it's lower paid healthcare professionals, retailers. Hey, shout out to all the retailers out there who are, working at the Sobeys and the Safeways, and truck drivers that are on the front lines and getting us what we need to survive. And I think we would all agree with that. Holy cow. And, Judy says, I think we need a new perspective on minimum wage and living wages. And I think most of us, again, would agree, right? These folks have been there for us. I looked at the guy as I came into Sobeys, and this guy is like sanitizing every single grocery cart, as you come in. And I know, like, he's my son's age, 18, 19, 20, he's making $15 an hour. And what is he? He's grinding it out so that all of us can come in and get our groceries without a whole lot of care and concern. And you just think somehow there's an inequity here, right? And so thanks for that. So any final thoughts, Angel? Thanks so much for your time. You're wonderful. But anything you'd like to just say here to the listeners here? And we've really, really appreciated your input today. But what else could you tell us today?
Thank you so much for having me. I think my closing thoughts would just be that, really recognize each and every one of you have a role to play in this pandemic, and everything that you're doing is powerful. And whether or not you're a healthcare professional, use your expertise, your knowledge to be able to provide clarification on misinformation right now and provide the public with important key information that is credible. In addition to that, I think as leaders, I think it's your role to really be able to see each and every one of your team members as individuals and see how this is impacting each and every one of them, and how you could support them each individually is very important. And you can make a huge difference on an individual basis, but also on a basis in a larger scale as well, because you'll be able to provide that care and that help for others as well through the support you give the ones that are your direct reports.
That's great. That's great. And so, I guess kind of on that note, I'll just kind of turn it over to Connie for a couple of sort of final thoughts here. I'll just speed ahead to a couple of her slides here, and just go ahead and share with us, Connie.
Well, as we've mentioned, this pandemic, they're calling it the perfect storm for an increase in what we are already seeing of depression, anxiety, and suicide. And we don't need to repeat that. I don't tend to like to lean on the fear. I like to see the what's reality and see that there's actually opportunity. And right now there is incredible opportunity for us to actually rise stronger, to rise above. And that's not with ignorance of what's happening. That's not with not knowing what's going on. But I do know that I was reading about some companies that rose above during the Great Depression. And I'm not saying we're in a Great Depression, but it's amazing to see that during times of crisis, heroes have always risen. People, we have more resilience in us than we know. And what you mentioned today, Angel, with just some of these strategies of mental wellness is what we have to focus on. I was reading about movie theaters. So movie theaters had shut down. Well, look at that. How familiar is that right now? And when they did come back, they not only did they give 2-for-1s and 50% off, but they targeted the buyers of the home, which is, of course, guilty as charged. And they gave out prizes to homemakers who would come. They'd give out free cookware. They would do whatever it took. Procter and Gamble, they started to do storytelling, creating characters on radio stations that women, homemakers all over the world fell in love with and bought their products. Breweries, they actually decided to expand their territory into dairy and meat and other areas of agricultural ventures. And I just was getting so inspired yesterday by these companies, realizing that if we can come out of the back of our brain, which is where anxiety is, the cortisol hormone that's caused by stress, constantly in the back of our brain, if we can acknowledge how people are feeling right now, which is really important. If you're a leader, so important right now to acknowledge the anxiety, the fear that people are feeling. We don't want to just say, get over it, because that will make it worse. But when we acknowledge someone's emotion, we actually bring it out of chaos, and that it makes sense to the person and we can move forward faster. But from there, when we come out of anxiety, creativity is our human right, and it's what we have. We come to our prefrontal cortex in the front of our brain, and we begin to problem solve. And where we problem solve best is together here on the webinar with our teams. This is where we can become creative, and then these moments of opportunity rise. Now, Abe and I, we love problems. We thrive in problems, and we at this point really want to help. We want to come alongside anyone in this webinar. You just need some guidance. You need somebody who's not in the deep end, in your deep end. We're all in our own deep ends, but sometimes you just need someone to pull you ashore. And we would love to do this because Abe, I know, for example, has led teams through crisis. I have experience through crisis. We know that it's possible to rise strong. And if you're interested, I'm going to put my phone number up here. So I don't want anyone to, to spam me, but I do want to offer a chance just for us to have a conversation.
Yeah.
We know that money is tight right now. It's not a great time financially. Let's not worry about that. Let's have a conversation on the phone about where you're at and set up a call, because we really do want to come alongside of you right now. So that's my phone number, and text me, call me, let's set it up.
Yeah. And, you know, honestly, there's so much power. Thanks for that, Connie, in conversation. You know, I know, like you mentioned earlier, we've been on lots of calls, and, you know, everything from, you know, large organizations to small side hustle type entrepreneurs. You know, the other thing that I think is really important to mention, you know, is that, you know, we've had, you know, particularly in Alberta, you know, since the flood of 2013, you know, really it's been one trauma after another. And, you know, for those of you who are in leadership roles, either in healthcare or in business or in government, you know, it's just been this compounding effect of trauma after trauma after trauma. And so I think what we need to do is find ways to process that trauma, right? Find ways to have conversation about it. And so please do reach out to Connie. We'd love to work with you. I guess the only other thing in closing we'd love to say is, you know, next week we have Dr. Wayne Hammond. You know, he's absolutely a Canadian expert when it comes to the science of resiliency. Been a psychologist and a professor for maybe longer than I've been alive. Well, maybe not that long, but long enough. And you're going to love Dr. Wayne. So he's going to be sharing next week. And can't say enough about you, Angel, today. Thank you so much. Maybe we'll just give you the final question here from Greg. And, you know, he's asking this. It's a big one, but, you know, we've got a couple of minutes. He said, what can we learn from today that we can use to build a better tomorrow? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think what we could learn from today is that we need to be agile in today's society. We need to continue to be able to, you know, hit the ground running and to be able to provide support to others in order to work in solidarity. We need to work collectively as teams, and being able to also really be adaptable just about to any situation. That's
so good. Thank you so much. And thanks, everybody. Please do follow us on you know, online, Wellness Innovate on Facebook, on Instagram, and for sure tune in next week, same time, and we'll see you all then. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.